All right, the Equisetum life cycle. Equisetum grows in this part of the world. It grows wild. It's sometimes considered kind of a pest, kind of a weedy type species. People try to get rid of it, but boy, it's pretty resilient. And so we see stems that are either pretty leafless, except for this ring here of pretty well dried up leaves, or this horsetail look, scouring rush or horsetail look. And so here's some that not much going in terms of leaves, except for this little ring of leaves at these nodes here. There's a strobilus. More about the strobilus in a few minutes. And so here's some pictures off the internet. These form real thick thickets of Equisetum stems, standing about as tall as me, about 6 feet tall. Here's a little circle of those leaves around the stem. The leaves, again, they're pretty soon dry up and turn brown. So the photosynthesis is conducted by what? The stem. Here's some strobili, strobilus right there. More about those later. And so we have a life cycle here. What do we have with these stems? Whether they're horsetaily look or not, they're connected to an underground stem called a what? A rhizome. This is what generation? The sporophyte. Before we go any further, let's take a look. We have some slides of a stem. Here's a picture from your book. You don't need to know most of these. Here's the endodermis. That's an old familiar term. Don't have to know most of the rest of these, except for something going on along the inside of the epidermal cells. This right up here. It says silica. That's what glass is made of. Silica is deposited mostly on the inner walls of epidermal cells. Let's take a closer look. Here's an Equisetum stem slide, and there are different canals and so forth. We have these canals. There are strange names for them, but we won't have to know those names. But here are epidermal cells. And why did the early pioneers use these as to help wash their dishes, kind of like scouring pads? It's because of this silica that's deposited along the inside of the epidermal cells. Yes, indeedy. So that's the stem. That's the stem. Now about this thing called a strobilus. Strobilus is made of, excuse me. The strobilus is made of little sections called sporangiophores, holding up, a bunch of sporangia. And so each one of these little sections, each one of these little sporangiophores is holding up its own little batch of sporangia. And of course, inside the sporangia are sporocytes, and which will divide by meiosis, producing spores. But let's take a closer look at some of these. First, the strobili, and here you can see these sporangiophores holding up a bunch of sacs, a bunch of sporangia with sporocytes developing into spores within. Here's another picture showing, kind of cutting across the strobilus, showing us, for example, right here, I see a stalk, I see a sporangiophore, I see sac sporangia underneath the sporangiophore. Here's from one of your lab slides. And so this is the sporangiophore. It's connected to the central axis of the strobilus. And here is a sporangium. And here's another sporangium. And there's a circle of them around this, the stalk of the sporangiophore. So these are what? Spores or sporocytes? Well, if it's before meiosis, of course, sporocytes, then they become spores. And so that is the sporangiophore, sporocytes developing into spores, and these spores have a very interesting look to them. They're not really galloping along. Those are appendages. Here's a spore that I took a picture of. Here's a couple of the spores. What are these appendages? Here's a picture from your book. They're called elators. Elators. And how do they function in helping this spore disperse? Well, they help it float in the breezes. They help the spore float in the breezes. It catches the wind. and they float in the breezes until they hit a very damp pocket of moisture. Then the elaters wrap around the spores and down they go into that moist area. Pretty nifty, huh? Absolutely. Well, that's about all the slides we have for the life cycle of Equisetum. We, of course, have a gametophyte, and there's Antheridia and Archegonia. Don't have any slides of those. We will just kind of draw those for the life cycle, but no slides in those. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is the life cycle of Equisetum. Okay, bye-bye.